Hello, everyone. This is Michelle
This is Amy.
from Possibly, and we are in the Brave and Blissful workshop. So this is session number two. Excited to do this for you, with you. So with that, I love Amy. I've shared a little bit about my background. Historically, I've been in corporate space for a long time, owned a few businesses, and have learned this servant leadership in a lot of ways, trial by error. Now I've adopted a lot of these tools and techniques that we teach today. Amy.
Yeah, so somewhat similar for me, actually. So, corporate background, and I have found that through my career, I keep working for smaller and smaller organizations. And the gift of learning within a corporate environment is you get a lot of cool tools. It's like OJT on the job training of how to lead and how to live a life. But I made a ton of missteps, largely due to inaction, and picked up some of the servant leadership along the way. So, pairing with Michelle, what's fun is that we kind of come at this from opposite sides of the spectrum. So, yeah, it makes doing this work fun because we can walk in shoes of different kinds of people.
Yeah, and we wind up thinking very different things and coming at it from like I'm here and you're here and then we meet here. It's like that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. If we were too similar, we'd be boring, and
That's
nobody
true.
likes boring. So,
That's true. All right. So shall we dive in?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So we already covered this one.
Or possibly.
Let's jump right in.
Yeah, so this is part 2 of 3, and today the topic title is Balancing Act. So we're going to start with some questions that prompted us to come with the key points we're bringing today. So as always, we like to learn out loud with creativity. So we will hit that, as well as covering how to be empathetic, what is an effective version of power-driven leadership, and what constructive criticism is composed of. That's the plan.
Thank you, Amy.
You bet.
So what we have done a lot of market research in this space, ask a lot of questions. We like asking questions. We've gotten so much in return. Meaning, what are people struggling with as it relates to corporate leadership roles or in their business, managing their teams, as an entrepreneur? How do they show up for their clients? And some of the things that we got back, we just are covering a few of them. So one, and this applies to so many people, how do I balance my own needs with the needs of others? That's one question that we're going to tackle today. The next thing that we're going to tackle today is why isn't every leader a servant leader? And how do I shift from a power-driven leadership? How do I shift my mindset from power-driven leadership to servant leadership? That's question 2. We're going to tackle that. And then the last one is, how do I know if I'm getting it right? What's the best form of feedback? What is the best form of a feedback loop to keep me on track, to show I care about their feedback, and then I'm actually listening to what somebody else is telling me? So that's what we're going to weave into today based on the research that we've gotten and the feedback that we've gotten from other people saying, this is what I'm going through right now. Anything else you want to add, Amy?
No, and I think no matter what level of leadership you're in, whether you're on the receiving end of someone else's leadership or you're the one leading, I think these questions would resonate for a lot of people.
Yeah, I like that last point that you made, as far as regardless of whether you're in a leadership position, like that first one, you can do this at home, right? Right. I balance my own needs with the needs of others, right? At home, regardless of whether you are leading someone in a business sense. Yep. All right. So we will cover all of those. Here we go. This is cool.
So what Michelle and I love to do is solve hard things through creativity. So I use poetry. Michelle uses morning pages. The more more we get into feeling our feelings, the more we're like, oh man, this is kind of a mess. So it's part of how we work our way out of those challenging situations is through creative endeavors. So in our case, it's using words, but it could be anything. Michelle, do you want to share Gretchen's quote here?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So, presence is us in balance. So, we were talking about that balancing act. Presence is us in balance, operating from true wholeness, where we are consciously uniting the elements in the center of the wheel. So, spirit, heart, body, and mind. And that is directly from Gretchen Kennedy. Thank you, Gretchen.
Yeah, thank you, Gretchen. So, in case you're wondering, what the heck am I supposed to do with that? Let me So, life's going to happen. And when we are faced with a stressful response, um, we often go to our go to stress response. So, most of you have probably heard of fight and or flight. Well, there's also freeze and fawn. And I think most of those are relatively obvious. So, fight is take action in a defensive way. Flight is I'm going to get the hell out of here. Freeze is just taking no action. And fawn is actually leaning into, oh my gosh, I got to make it better, also known as people pleasing. I tend historically to fall into the latter two, and Michelle tends to fall into the former two, which makes this really fun to do together.
Beautiful examples. Fight or flight covered on this side.
Mhm. And I will freeze or fawn in a hot second. So the idea, because we like alliteration, is to get into flow. So we're going to talk a bit about what the less than desirable responses could be, and then how you can start to give yourself a moment's pause to get yourself back into flow. So that's the kind of the form we're going to take for these examples today.
Exactly. It's good stuff. Good stuff. So, being empathetic is what we're going to cover next. But the question, the first question that came to us that we're going to cover is, how do I balance my own needs with the needs of others? And how we do that is being empathetic, or one of the ways. We don't necessarily, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this balancing act, but one of the ways is actually being empathetic.
So for team people pleasing, I would say the issue often falls in not being empathetic to ourselves. So I will give an example. So early in my corporate career, okay, so most of us when we become adults, we're accustomed to achieving. Get the good grades, graduate from X, Y, or Z, and moving up. So I had this desire to move up, and so I asked my management, hey, I want to advance, and the what the feedback I got was, oh, well, there's a process and you just kind of got to wait your turn. And so I sat back and I waited and I waited and I waited. And I felt powerless. I felt like I was just, waiting for someone to notice that I'm doing great. And I was just, I can't even imagine how much I lost in inaction by that choice. I didn't know any better, but it was still a choice to take no action. So, were I to turn that around, if I could tell younger me, I would write down, what am I feeling and why? I would address what's going on, and I give myself direction like I would give to someone else. I'm really good at helping others, and I kind of sucked at helping myself in those moments. So for me, that's what empathy would have looked like to be helpful.
And in that same situation then, Amy, for others, how does that look, how does that play out for others?
Well, the hard truth is you have to look out for you. You're your own best advocate. So grieving the fact that someone is not going to be like prince or princess charming and come in and save the day. You have to be your own hero. That is I had to grieve that. Like I was disappointed that the world didn't take care of me because I was being a good girl and I was not rocking the boat. I had to grieve that in order to kind of jolt myself into taking care of myself action.
And that's kind of like putting on your mask first, right? In the
Yeah,
airplane analogy,
yeah,
you're in the airplane, you put on your mask first, and then you can help somebody else, and then you can do the balancing act, I guess.
absolutely,
Because
absolutely.
otherwise, the seesaw is you're sitting at the bottom of the seesaw all the time.
Uh-huh. So Michelle, do you have a fight or flight example that would make sense to you?
Yeah. So, well, there's the example that I have actually is both at the same time.
Good.
I am team bulldozer. um, yeah, learn lots of valuable lessons there. So, for me, this was 20 years ago, probably. I've grown since, but this is a really good example. I sent an email to the C suite, the top 10 reasons for leaving Cooper Power, David Letterman style. And I asked a friend, should I send this? Well, I did ask questions and then I didn't care what she said. She's like, no, don't send it. I'm like, too bad. I'm going to send it anyway. Beautiful. So I sent that. I was walked out of the building. I knew that I was going to be walked out of the building. And I was not empathetic to my boss at the time, to my team at the time, to anybody. I was looking out for me at the time. So I didn't actually do any of this that's on screen. None of it. None of it. I just like blew up the bridge, walked out the door. So what I've learned since then, and the how I learned it was as I moved to the next thing, whatever that next thing was, I wasn't getting what I wanted and needed, and I wasn't balancing my own behavior with those of others and helping to progress my own career and my own work forward. And so it materialized in a lot of different ways in my life. So now I actually write down what's happening. So what I learned to use a tool which we've actually have this tool, the problem impact analysis and recommendation worksheet. I use it constantly. I use it constantly. And I write down what's the problem, what are the symptoms, what are the options, what the recommendation. I could have done that in that scenario. I actually could have used that and probably had a much better outcome. I mean, as funny as it is today, I could have had a much better outcome to that. And I ask a lot of questions now. So for other people, I ask who, what, where, when, how to gather data so I can understand where they're coming from. And then I can determine how I want to show up and what's happening for me. What is, you talked about my morning pages earlier. I write down what's going on for me. And then I also will write down for other people what's going on for them. So then we can meet in the middle and I ask open-ended questions that way.
And what's interesting is coming from opposite ends in our young careers, getting clear about what the hell is going on is basically the first step, regardless of what your stress response is.
Yeah.
Like something isn't right, and pausing and going, what is it? What's frustrating me? What's making me disappointed? Any of those things, just pausing is definitely your first step to being empathetic.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what's cool about what we're talking about here, so when we're looking at that balancing act, we want to you could use for others active listening. That's why we have two ears, right?
One
And
mouth.
one mouth. We can ask a lot of open-ended questions to get information from other people, and then we compare it that back in a way that feels right. So they know that they've been heard.
Yeah.
For ourself, like we've just talked about, I write stuff down, morning pages or journaling or whatever, or just bar napkin, doesn't matter. What are you use? What am I feeling and why? And then what you mentioned also, give yourself the direction you might give someone else. This reminds me, I was at a training that wasn't mine, where someone said, "What would your best friend tell you?" So if you're beating yourself up, what would your best friend say to you? Would they say the same things that you're saying to yourself? That's a really a good way to look at that, I think.
That's so weird. I actually just used that tool with someone the other day, and it just came to me randomly. I'm like, if you were your best friend, what would you tell you to do? And don't
Right?
overthink it. Just blurt it out. And sometimes we surprise ourselves. The answer is always in there, and we're like, I just didn't know how to ask the question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, maybe you might think like, "Oh, am I have multiple personality disorder?" Like, treat yourself like your own best friend, right? I don't know. It is a good exercise though.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to power-driven leadership. So, the second question that came to us was, why isn't every leader a servant leader? And how do I shift from power-driven leadership to servant leadership?
I have lots of examples of working for people who would place demands rather than
Mm,
asks or use intimidation to get stuff done. Um, being team freeze and fawn, I will describe the the downside of being too sugary. So
mm,
I had a role where I led a lot of volunteers. And leading volunteers is a bit like herding cats if you've never done it. Much respect for people who work in nonprofits because you can't make anybody do anything. You have to use influence to gather your resources to work towards a common goal. It's not particularly easy. And I had a volunteer who was really had some personal attacks in public forums against me, which
mm,
was very unusual for me. I was very accustomed to girl power and people supporting one another. I played team sports. I'm just very used to women uplifting other women. So this came out of the blue. And I didn't know how to respond. I literally had no muscle for this kind of moment. And so I armored myself with, it's okay,
mm,
I'm fine. And I didn't know to set a boundary. I was too afraid to uh, upset this person, to, you know, disrupt the mission of the organization. I put myself not even in the back seat, like I was in the trailer car behind, and
You're not even in the trunk?
no, I wasn't. I wasn't. And so for me, my armor was pretending I was fine when I was really not okay. And so you guys may have heard Brene Brown. She's written a few
Mhm.
books. She's fairly popular. Maybe she's done a TED talk or two. And she's written this great book, Dare to Lead. And in here, she references this concept of armor versus daring. So if you have the book, you want to go to page 76, 77 for a really handy chart. But I'm going to read a really quick quote from her Daring Greatly book because I think it's really relevant. As children, we found ways to protect ourselves from vulnerability, from being hurt, diminished, and disappointed. We put on armor. We used our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors as weapons, and we learned how to make ourselves scarce, even to disappear. Now, as adults, we realize that to live with courage, purpose, and connection, to be the person who we long to be, we must again be vulnerable. We must take off the armor, put down the weapons, show up, and let ourselves be seen.
Mm.
Not for the faint of heart, y'all, but it is incredible what we can do when we give ourselves permission to be daring, to be vulnerable. So for those of us on that side of the equation, that really resonated for me. What armor could look like.
Nice.
Yeah, Michelle, how
Example.
about you?
So, I mean, I look at this and I well, the hopping off point from the one leadership role to the next leadership role, learning lessons, I tend to place demands rather than ask. So that is something that I had to learn early on. I have a tendency to just come on, let's just get stuff done. Come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. And it not asking someone to do something or leaning in to find out more about what's going on with them and how they can help do whatever it is you're trying to do can come at a cost if you don't, if you just say, "Do your job." So I don't know if for any football fans that are watching this, Bill Belichick and the Patriots, my husband is a big Patriots fan. He has this "Do your job" T-shirt. So I probably could have worn that around. That might have been a warning shot for a lot of people. And how did that show up? So as a response, my stress response was I'm responsible for these deadlines and meeting dates, and I can be more aggressive when I'm in a stress response as opposed to being assertive. And so how that aggressive behavior materializes is placing demands. Just do your job. Just get it done. I don't it doesn't matter what is going on for you from a human perspective. That's irrelevant. And for the longest time I created this Chinese wall at work, and in some cases in my relationships, to say it doesn't matter what's happening with you as a human or what's happening with you as a person. We need to get this done. Just get it done. So that goes back to what Amy was talking about, and I was oblivious to people's feelings. I wasn't even paying attention to my own. So if I can't pay attention to my own feelings, and I'm not looking at that gas gauge to see what it's doing, am I happy, sad, frustrated, angry, whatever, I'm certainly not going to be aware of it for other people. So my take on, we asked the question, why isn't every leader a servant leader? And how do I shift from power driven leadership to servant leadership? So, one answer to that, why isn't every leader a servant leadership? Why isn't every leader a servant leader? It's because there could be a lack of awareness. There could be a lack of awareness. There could be, and this is where if you are able to leverage some empathy for people that are struggling with this, they might be in their stress response. They actually might be in a place where they're stressed, they're aggressive, or they're hiding, or they're fawning, or any of that. And so that could be why. They could be just jerks. I mean,
They do exist.
right? I mean, that's possible. They could be just jerks, but they could be in their stress response, and they could be used to armoring up, like Amy, that quote from Brene Brown. They could just be, that has been a pattern that they've adopted, and they don't know any other way. So how do I shift from power driven to servant leadership? It's creating an awareness of what's going on with you, and starting to see, am I armoring up? Am I daring? Do I practice empathy? Am I aware of my feelings? What are they? Am I writing them down? I mean, I covered that, earlier, but Amy, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I was thinking I had an example of someone bringing to my awareness some of the armor. So
Mm.
I switched careers from a traditional corporate to nonprofit, and my manager said to me, "Hey, you've moved from an urban area to a rural one, and your job is to build relationships." And she said, "People want to know you before they want to do business with you." And uh, the record skipped in my head because I didn't understand that concept. My orientation was to be efficient, to not waste people's time, to get in, get it done, and move on, because I thought that was being respectful. And come to find out that regular people walk around the world building actual relationships with actual humans. And newsflash, I was unaware of this. My boss, I still thank her on a regular basis, in my head, in my heart, like, holy buckets. She knew what I needed to hear. And
Human first.
human
First.
first,
Yeah.
shocker, right? So, someone sometimes has to take the gentle two before to the head to get you to see that there's another way to live. And Michelle, I think you had a coffee chat conversation with someone that was in a similar vein.
Exactly. So, on in that same space, I show up, let's get stuff done, do your job, like do your job, get stuff done. And she invited me to a coffee chat. I had just started working with her. She's like, let's to get to know one another and just chat about our personal experiences, our lives, our families. And I'm like, what's that got to do with work? Are you kidding me? What? And I mean, my mind is just blown that we're going to spend not just a half an hour. I mean, you're blowing my mind on an hour coffee chat when I've got TikTok, right? But I leaned in. I'm like, okay, I think maybe I can learn something from this. And what I learned is what you just described. Is like show up as a human first, make the connection, build the bridge. And she taught me a very valuable lesson. That lesson is get to know someone first before you dive into business or start doing work with them, because then you can pull out those various nuggets to lean into what it is that they makes them tick, how you can influence their behavior, how you can help them in some way. It's a beautiful thing, instead of TikTok, get it done.
Clearly, you and I both really wanted to get things done.
I know, that's awesome. Oh, that's great. So we will move on to the next topic. And so the third question was, how do I know if I'm getting it right? Well, I guess it's 4 questions technically. So but we're slamming the last 2 questions together. How do I know if I'm getting it right? What's the best form of feedback? What's the best form of a feedback loop to keep me on track, to show I care about their feedback and that I am listening? That's a mouthful. There's a lot there.
It is. So we kind of lumped all of that question into the concept of constructive criticism. And this is not a way of wrapping, an insult in velvet. This is for real. Constructive criticism at its core is about endeavoring to help someone, not tear them down, but to build them up. And I love these tips. So, think before you speak. Can you say this in a way that's going to solve for moving things along and honoring the other person versus just grr, because we've all felt that. How will it be perceived when I give it? Is it actually helpful? And can I say something good when I share this? So in session 1 of this workshop, described the SBI method. There's a way to give feedback. So situation, behavior, impact. So I'd learned this, and then I had a beautiful opportunity to use it with a vendor. And so I'm a little cautious, in case that hasn't been made clear. But I felt like my teammates were being like put in a bad way. And that helps me take action more when I get to be like protector of my peeps. So I was coming from that point of strength because I was pretty nervous. And so I very, very carefully constructed, in this case, an email response to this person. Mm-hmm. And I described, in our last meeting, here we were. This is what I have seen as far as that person's behavior and then the impact to me. And I even finished with, I know things happen, but here's some context behind why this is upsetting to me. I like to be a good steward of company funds. I know you have valuable insight, and I feel like we're not being set up for success if we don't have this communication going, XYZ. Details don't matter. So once I hit send, I was like, oh gosh. And what's crazy is this person and I had a follow-up call, and they paused and said, thank you. No one had ever given them any feedback that was actually useful ever in their whole life. Like, this is a grown person. And they just, we had a couple of calls thereafter, and they just kept referring to it. Like, thank you for the gift of taking the time to explain to me that my behavior wasn't working for you and why, and how we could make it better.
Wow. And she said that out loud.
She said it out loud. It was crazy and validating. Talk about like, okay, stepping into courage, like a stamp of approval. I was empowered to like, holy cow, I'm going to use this thing everywhere, that it is appropriate. Because I felt better for getting it off my chest and having my team's back. And she felt like I can be a better vendor because I now understand what it's like to be on the client side. And it was awesome. It was just so awesome.
Yeah, I love that. And so in this 1 through 5, what did that cover for you?
That well, I don't know if I could figure out 3 because I didn't know this person well enough, but I think
Mm,
I hit 1, 2, 4, and 5
nice.
by
Nice done, nicely done.
it's like 80%. But I took so much time, you guys. I mean, I really thought about it and I tried to make it really, really specific, observable, not like you suck, I can't rely on you, like none of that, inflammatory language. It was much more about like finite, I see this situation this way and I want you to see it how I see it. That was the intention. And it was received as such.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And for me, so if we, look at this question, how do I know if I'm getting it right? What's the best form of a feedback loop? So this is actually just recently. I've got, worked with a gal that's on my team, and she went on vacation. We had a major meeting when she was out, and she had already had planned that vacation, but she showed up during her vacation for it. And then we're, communicating emails back and forth. And then I got sucked into asking her to do stuff, and she's reading her email while she's out. And then I get a hot email back like, well, why are you asking me to do this? I'm on vacation. And I'm like, well, why are you checking your email when you're out? And so my response in the moment was, you know what, time out. Let's just talk about this when you get back. Once you're back from vacation, I'll cease and desist. You're right. Why am I sending you emails? I'll just cease and desist. And when she got back, I was able to lean in and apologize for not respecting her boundary of being on vacation. And I really meant that, right? I wanted to, make sure that she understood that I was, I really felt bad about that. And I also said, and in the future, let us work together to figure out how to create the boundaries for you to go on vacation, right? Because obviously we had this meeting that flew in at the last minute, and you're trying to help the team, and then you're just in your inbox because we had this meeting. So for I really sat with the think before you're delivering it, and the criticism was as much mine as it was hers. So us having a dialogue, constructive feedback and constructive criticism on how we each could handle that situation better. And is this helpful, having the conversation in a positive way, which, saying thank you so much for showing up on your vacation to help the team. And ultimately, when I said I'm sorry, I could have done a better job with creating boundaries for that. She's like, I get it. It's no big deal. I understand. I'm also was checking my email, and I probably could have not done that. So that, is really huge. And she felt heard. She felt that I was listening to her. And how do you know if you're on the right track? Paying attention to the body language and the responses back. And like, so Amy you got very clear cues on, thank you for telling me that, right? So that is one of the ways that you know that you're getting it right. Another way is if the stress or whatever's happening goes from here to here, and you diffuse that situation or diffuse whatever's taking place, that's another way to know that you're getting it right. And the third way is just ask, are you getting this right? Am I showing up the way that you want me to show up, and get the answer? And if not, then correct it.
And sometimes you'll give it and it goes nowhere. That's
Mhm.
also data.
Right.
Uh, I've certainly had circumstances where I have exhausted my toolkit of ways to give the feedback, the constructive criticism. And it just meant in that case, we weren't a good fit. And, if it's in an organization, sometimes that means that person doesn't belong in the team.
Yeah.
I have a very, very long fuse before I get to that point. But it's really helpful to understand that whatever you receive, it is all feedback. And, I love that, Michelle, you start with walking a mile in their shoes and starting with a empathetic, I'm sorry that I jammed you up in whatever way. And I could see how you were in a heightened state and I wasn't helping.
Right.
And that's probably awesome for the fight and flight people. For the freeze and fawn people, we tend to over apologize. You don't
Mm.
have to apologize for, I don't know, existing or breathing air near them. Like there's a limited use for I'm sorry. In this case, it's very specific, much like when you give a compliment. I would rather receive a compliment about something very specific versus like, you're awesome. Like, no, like, hey, I loved when you parroted back what I said in that meeting. So we could take the conversation in that direction. You elevated me. Like, I'd way rather hear that because then I know how I can support someone. It's good data. So the I'm sorry here is to help diffuse the agita that's going on in the moment and not to be like, oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Like, no, we're not doing that. That's not
Exactly.
helping.
Exactly. That's awesome. So we covered, I'm going to go backwards real quick. We covered these 3 key questions with this agenda. And we are thrilled that you all joined us here today.
Yes.
And so now we are going to close out by saying thank you. Start practicing some of this because that's really ultimately how you improve. I practice on my family all the time. Sometimes I tell them, sometimes I don't. And then I move it into my business and my work. But that is anything else you want to say, Amy, before we wrap up and say see you in round 3?
No, I just, balance it's going to be a constant vigilance to see, am I out of balance? Am I relying too heavily on one tool in my toolkit? And is there anything else that would be a more precision instrument in this moment when you're trying to be a servant leader? That would probably be it.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah.
Well, this was fun as always.
Awesome.
And we'll see all of you in round 3. Have a great
Bye.
day. Bye.